Hi guys, I'm October, but you can call me Toby. Thanks for coming to spend some time with me today. So we are continuing on with sculpting Hornet The Knight Silksong characters, and today I will be making the Knight and Hornet. And these two, the Knight isn't featured in Hornet The Knight Silksong, I don't believe, but I do want to make him so that when I do the landscape, I wanted to have him meeting up with Hornet. And so I want to make both of them so that I can make them a landscape where they're having a catch up. I've already made the armature and done the first layer of clay just to bulk out the figures. That was in the last video, so pop back into that video if you would like to watch that. Otherwise, I will jump straight into this video moving forward with sculpting out the figures before I paint them. Alright, let's get into it. We've got Knight here. I already did the armature and the first layer of clay. Here's Hornet as well in the last video. So I'm not going to do a huge recap on that because I went through it before already. But you can see their base positions are that the Knight is standing and he will be looking upwards at Hornet, who is sitting upon her needle. I do know she never sits on a needle in the game, but I just liked the idea of her sitting up on her needle. So let's get into adding a bit more detail to these bodies, lengthening out these legs, finishing off these horns. And I am working in coloured clays, but for their heads, their faces, I want to be using white clay since I am going to have to paint this white at the end. First things first, I want to get these legs covered, well, the wire of the legs. Hornet's legs do protrude out the front of her little cape, and so I want to get some clay onto them and just hope that it actually adheres and stays after the baking process. Now that I've got one leg done, I am going to bulk out her face here a bit. Looking at the reference images I have, I'm noticing that the way her face and horns sit, the horns tilt back on an angle from the face. So she's got like quite a pointed little chin, and I haven't allowed for that in my positioning of this initial sculpture. I just didn't realize it at first. So I'm going to bulk out this face with some of this pink to add in a bit more of a chin detail for her and to get a little bit of that angle to her face leaning back into the horns. Alright, I'm liking the look of that now, so I'm going to trim down the Knight's horns so that I can add some more detail there when I'm ready. And I'm going to bulk out his legs as well. Checking out his reference imagery as well. His head is quite it's not a cube, I guess it's like a rounded rectangular shape. So I'm just going to bulk out his head with additional clay. I'm going to be baking these lots of times to save progress. I don't want to make progress and then lose it by trying to work on too much at once. So these will be going in the oven quite regularly. Now that that first lot of stuff is nice and hardened, I'm going to add some more bulk to the Knight's legs here. I want to get that nice thigh gap shape that they have in all of their reference images. I also want to bulk out his little body a little bit more, make it a little more symmetrical. And same thing with the legs. They kind of have a rounded outer edge and they're straighter on the inseam, so I'm going to try and do that as well. Plus I will bulk out this second leg for Hornet. And then I'll pop these back in the oven again. Now I did decide as well that I wasn't happy with the angle of Hornet's face to horns, so I'm going to shave down those horns with an X-Acto knife. It might look quite chaotic, but I am being careful with this, and no, I did not cut myself during this. Alright, now bulking those out again with white clay. And I'm a lot more happy with the shape of them now. I think I will end up doing an additional layer or so just to smooth them out a bit more, but her face has a much more pointed shape to it now, and those horns I think have like more symmetry and a little bit more of the angle to them. The Knight is back and that bulk out of the body and the head is nice and solid now. I'm really happy with how his legs are looking. Now I want to cover his face. I'll use this white to continue bulking that out to get that square shape. trying to not forget that he is meant to have his head tilted upward. I've also just smoothed out his horns. I'm not particularly happy with the shape of them. I'll probably shave them down a bit, but at least they're nice and smooth now. All right, Hornet is back from the oven, and aside from this little like wonky tip on the end of her horn, I'm happy with the shape of the head now. So I will just like smooth those horns off. For now, I'm going to move on and work out how I'm going to do her cape off of her body. So I was having a decent think about what color to use for the cape. Since I want to save that white for the faces, I've decided to go with blues for the capes. Looking at the reference imagery, both her red cape and the knight's grey-blue cape are in bluer tones. Like her red is a blue-toned red, if that makes sense. It doesn't look like an orange-toned red to me in any of the reference imagery. So I'm just going to start bulking this out, and I need to work out how I'm going to get the clay to look like the folds of her cloth. So I'm just popping her on a couple pieces of clay here that are wrapped, so she's not going to stick to them too much. I want to just smooth off this additional layer, like this additional underlayer of her cloak as much as I can. The edges of this will form the base of the folds that I make out of her cloak. So, right, I'm happy with that. I'm going to pop that in the oven. In the meantime, I'm going to keep working on the knight. He's already been baked, so his head is nice and firm. I'm going to work on the back of it, which I need to keep in mind is tilted down a little bit because the front of his face is angled up. Just working on bulking that out and getting that nice squared off or rectangular but rounded corners, rounded edges, head shape. I'm lengthening his front of his face a little bit more, and that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with his little horns for now. So I'm going to add on the additional little prong of his horn. I'm just going to use a couple little bits of clay, smooth them on, make sure that they're looking symmetrical-ish. And once I'm happy with both of them, he'll go back in the oven again. And here is Hornet back with her base layer. She's going to be more sturdy now because she's got a wider base to sit on. Unfortunately, I did try and tilt her horns back a bit and this one cracked, so I'm going to attempt to fix that with a layer of clay. If that doesn't work, like if the crack is persistent, I'll just pop a bit of super glue on that. Also just smoothing out a couple other little spots on her horns. Alright, the crack is still visible, but that's okay for now. And here is the knight back from the oven. I'm really happy with how his head is looking. I will sand this right down, and I think I'll even use the knife just to shave off a little bit under the base of one of those horns, just to make them a bit more symmetrical too. And here is Hornet after another sanding, and I did end up using super glue on that crack. I'm going to sand both their heads just a bit more. I want to get them as smooth as I can. And look at that difference, that's so much smoother. It's not perfect. Unfortunately, I'm not a machine. It's not going to be perfectly symmetrical or perfectly smooth, but it's a lot better. That crack is still slightly visible, but the super glue will keep it secure and stop it from actually like breaking any further or anything, so I'm not too worried about that. Now that they are so smooth, I do need to start working on these cloaks, which honestly I've been putting off a little bit. I did need to make sure that I was happy with their heads, their head shape, how smooth their heads would be, so that I wouldn't be impacting the cloaks and any work I'd done there with sanding or any of that type of thing. So here I am trying to work out how I'm going to do the knight's cloak, since in some references it looks like individual strands, in others it looks like a solid cloak. I think in game, since these are meant to be bugs, this would probably be their wings, right? But in the way they're drawn, they don't really look wing-like to me at all. Particularly Hornets, like it looks very much like a cloak, and I'm pretty sure in the second game, I'm pretty sure at some point someone takes her cloak from her, don't they? And wears it just to get back. But yeah, I don't know the lore of the knight, if this is their wings or if it is just a cloak. I think I'm going to do it as one singular piece, and I'm going to fold one side on, fold the other side over the top, and just try and get the angles of the front of that where it overlaps to look right, and also try and smooth it under his head so that I'm getting the definition from head to cloak. Like there's none of his neck visible, but there's a very definite like dip in between his head and then onto his cloak and it spreads out over his little body. So I want to make sure I get that in there. I'll be trimming this one down. It's too long. I'm not sure how much. I wanted to leave it quite long to start with just so that I had room to work with, because easier to cut it off than try and add it on, right? All right, I've trimmed that up somewhat and I'm just trying to smooth it out and get it to sit in sort of the right shape overall so that I can do some work on top of this. So I'm trying to puff out the back of it because it has sort of shifted in towards the little body and I need it to be sitting outwards more. And now I'm going to take a minute away from that and work out what I'm doing with Hornet. I'm going to cover both her legs in black, I think. Can you tell that I'm really unsure of how to do her cloak? I'm just worried it's not going to turn out how I want it to. But anyway, I'll use this black on her legs. They're going to be black anyway, right? So I'm going to get that as smooth as I can. And then her legs will be all done. And I'll have no reason not to work on the cloak. So into the oven she goes. In the meantime, I did end up putting Knight in the oven and he's back now. And I'm realizing this cloak is way too long. So I'm going to cut it down. I'm going to cut off some of the excess on the inside as well, just to tidy things up a bit. Basically, yeah, just all tidy up using the knife at this point for him. Whittling it down a little bit too. I made it a little too thick for a base. Taking off some more of that length. In the imagery, you can't see the back of their cloak through their open leg. So I'm going to actually cut this so that it lifts up at the back, like so that you can't see it too much from the back, but the front is that little bit longer. And I think I'm going to make it quite a bit shorter because I do want those ragged ends. So he's looking very cute now. It's very much shorter. You cannot see it through his legs, which is perfect. And this is going to be a perfect solid little base for me to build on top of. Spending my time on this front piece here, trying to get that right curvature that I'm seeing in the reference imagery. And I made sure to start on the side that will be underneath, so then when I do the layer on top, it can actually sit over the top and I can just smooth it down, and so it will look like it is sitting over the top, because it is. All right, that is one side more or less done for him. I'm just going to add a little bit more bulk at the back here because there's a bit too much of a gap between the head and the cloak. I just want to fill that in a little bit and smooth it out before I get around to the back. I am keeping in mind that I have to be able to bake this, so I'm just going to fiddle with the front of this till I'm happy with the look of it, and I'll pop that in the oven as is. All right, the Hornet is back. Her legs are looking great. I'm just going to give them a little bit of a sand, smooth them out as much as I can. It's a bit difficult since one's on top of the other, but I'll do what I can. By the way, whenever I'm sanding these, I do use a wet paper towel just to clean off any dust from the sanding, because the clay does not like sticking to itself when it's dusty. All right, finally, there's no more reason not to start on her cloak. I think I've worked out what I want to do. I'm going to cut these sort of angled slices of thinner clay. I'm just going to pop them where I want them and try to emulate the drape of her cloak that I'm seeing in the reference image. So it did take quite a bit of trial and error for me to work out like what shape to use, how thick I could get away with the clay, or how thin I could get away with the clay being, how to make it sit how I wanted, again leaving it on the longer side so that I can trim it down later if needed. Doing my best as well with this to keep the clay smooth. It's going to be very hard to sand this later, so keeping that in mind as well. Before I bake this, I am going to try and do this little centerpiece that's between her legs as well, because then on the next round I can do the bits that go over the legs, as this bit might be difficult to come back to. Just doing my best, as I said, to get that smooth and still holding the shape that I want. And Knight is back from the oven. This side has been baked. Nice and solid now. Just thinking if I want to work around the back now, or if I want to work on the other front side and then around the back. I am going to be moving into this darker clay, so I'm going to work around the back before I do the last bit on the front. Same process as before, so I'll speed through this one. And here is Hornet back. Those three pieces of cloak are nice and solid now. Yes, they're a little bit long, but the shape is there that I was looking for, so I'm really happy with this. And it's time to move forward with these draped pieces that are over her legs. And I'm just going to keep adding pieces on as the mood sort of strikes me, working from that reference image of how everything's draping, trying to keep it all as smooth as possible, keeping in mind how hard it will be to sand, but also trying to get those raised shapes in place as well. Alright, I'm happy with how that's looking. I can trim it down later, so I'm going to pop her in the oven again. And here is the knight back. Their cloak is looking good. I'm just going to do this front section. Same process as before, and Hornet is nice and solid now. I could have made those ones smoother, I do think, but it's time to work on the back now. Same process as before, so again, I'll speed through these. Hornet's cloak is on. Came out a lot better than I was expecting. I'm also so happy with the knight's cloak. I'm just going to do some fine tuning with the knife, shortening or like evening out the edges or the lengths of Hornet's cloak here. I'm also going to thin out the edges underneath a little bit too, because I did leave some of it quite bulky so that it would hold its shape. I don't know, I think overall that'll just help it look a bit more light and airy. Alright, so I have that to a stage where I am happy with it now. So her cloak is looking good. She can sit pretty decently on a flat surface. Plenty of dried clay to be cleaned up now. Probably should have put my wet clay away before doing all of that carving. Moving on to the knight's cloak, I'm going to do some carving on this on the edges and the base, thinning some things out, adding in some more little rough patches and tattered sections on the ends. I did have some mishaps doing this where I just took it too far and the whole sort of edge snapped off. So I'll just go back in and add a little bit more clay onto that just to tidy it back up. Alright, so now that those little broken off bits are fixed, I will move Knight back into the oven for another bake. And it's time for Hornet to get her little collar. Nothing like a turtleneck, eh? So again, trying to use the reference image as much as possible, but keeping in mind also her positioning. I'm looking at the other references as well, and I want to make sure that the back of this little turtleneck is sitting away. Meanwhile, her chin is a little bit tucked into it because she is leaning forward into the turtleneck. So there'll be some room at the back, and her chin and maybe the sides of her face a little bit will be tucked into it. Just smoothing that out, making sure it's not looking too thick, and doing my best to get a sort of straight edge on it as well. Alright, at this stage I'm going to pop her in the oven too, and now that she's back out of the oven, I will trim that up a little bit with the knife. Here is the knight as well. So those little edge bits are all fixed up, looking good. And it is time to move on to painting. So for these, I will be using white, black, Scarlet Lake, and Ultramarine Deep Blue. Same paints I used for the last video. They are Creative Place The Artist Collection. It's just an acrylic paint, not a particularly expensive one. And I'm going to block out those colors. So the dark blue and the black in particular, those pigments just leached onto everything else while I was working with them. So the whites got a little bit blue while I was working on these cloaks, and I've got to fix that. I'm going to do my best to cover that up in as few layers as possible. For these heads, I'll go with white. For her cloak, I'm going to go in with a straight up red just to get the base color down. Her legs are black, so I'll just leave them till later because I will get some overflow from the red, I'm sure, and I can just tidy that up later with the black. On the knight, again, white for the head. I'm going to cover up those blues, make sure we have a nice pristine face. His cloak is, it's more grey than it is blue really, but I'm going to go in with the dark blue just straight up on those light blue sections, just so I can get a more cohesive base to work on. again, his legs and stuff are black, so I'm not too worried about that. I can just add that on later. And here they are after, I don't actually know how many coats of the white I had to do to get them to this stage. There's maybe like 4 or 5 of the blue on his cloak. I did, I think, yeah, 4 or 5 coats of the red to get that nice and solid. Again, don't know how many layers of white I've done, and I'll probably do more. But this is where we're at with our base colors. Now I want to go in and start defining the shadows and the light sections on their clothes, just to give them a bit more depth. I also want to bring out some of the shadows on their heads. I know I spent all that time getting them to white. My main focus for getting it to white was on the knight's face, because his face will be to the light, and the back of Hornet's head, because that will be to the light. I'm just mixing up like a light grey here. I'm adding a touch of blue to it just to keep in those blue tones, because everything here is kind of like blue toned. Trying to sort of bring that around the sides in a gradient. And at this stage I am really happy with his cloak, with the shadows and the highlights on there. So I want to just bring back the white on the front. I've come a little bit too far with the shading around the sides of the head, so I just want to lighten that all up. So here we go with layers of white until it's white enough that I'm happy with it. For Hornet, I'm going to shade in her horns first. The bottom of her face is in the most shadow, and I'm a little bit nervous about getting the gradient on that right. So I'm just going to go in with this really pale grey to start with, working down from the tops of the horns, more white layers, trying to get the diffusion of these shadows on the sides right for both characters. You can see I've gone in with the dark colours on Hornet's cloak there. They're pretty messy looking at the moment, but I will refine them more later. I just wanted to get them on and let them dry to define where those areas would be. Trying to be as careful as I can not to get the red on the white, because it does seem to just spread really quickly through that white. Really defining where I think the light will be hitting it from the back as well. I do still want to highlight at the front, even though it will be more or less in shadow. I think the most work on these two honestly went into their heads. Getting the shading right on their heads was really tricky, and it took quite a lot of time. Here is where Hornet is at. I'm really happy finally with the shading on her face. The back of her head is lovely and white. I've painted her underside all black so that it's not a huge mix of colours. I've got a good amount of depth and shadow on the front of her cloak as well. Done the same thing with Knight, made sure that under the cloak there is nice and dark. His cloak has all those highlights, lowlights that I was looking for, and I'm finally happy with the shading on their face. So I'm going to go in and varnish now. So this is a quick varnish layer that I'm going to do over their faces and over the whole head, I think, just to lock in that shading. I really don't want to stuff that up now that I finally got it to a spot I'm happy with it. I haven't done the main bulk of the back of his head because that's where the weight, he sits on the bottom of his cloak and the back of his head. That's the spots that are in contact with my desk, so I'm not going to varnish those while the rest of this dries. Hornet's going to get her face varnished, so I'm going to do her whole head since she sits up on her bum. There's no worry of her tipping over. She's very bottom heavy, so I can do her whole head in varnish. The varnish will also protect the shading on the faces when I add these black eyes. I'm going to use this watercolor pencil, which is in a very dark purple, just to sort of block out where I want to put the eyes. I was toying with the idea of doing more oval shape for Knight's eyes, but then looking at reference imagery, they're quite round most of the time, so I'm just going to round those off and do my best to make them symmetrical. As I said, their heads ended up being the most work considering they have the least colour. Now, same thing with Hornet, I'm just going to mark out where I think these eyes will go. Hers are much more almond in shape, so I'm just going to mark out the middle and then extend that up into the almond shape and then down. Trying again to get them as symmetrical as I can. Alright, I'm happy with her eyes. I'm going to come back to Knight now and try and even these out a little bit more. Honestly, I was thinking at this point maybe I should have just wiped one eye off completely. They're looking pretty good here, and then I noticed that the right eye is a bit smaller and like slightly lifted, so I just want to fix that up. Yeah, I just fiddle with the eyes until I'm happy with them. They do get a layer of varnish now and then over the eyes so that I can sort of save my work and work on top of that. Hornets were pretty much done from the get-go. Hers I was really happy with on that first pass. Knights, just because they're circles. Yeah, it took a lot to get them looking how I wanted. And then after the final photos outside, I actually noticed that the left eye on the Knight's face was slightly like smaller. So I came back in again post and fixed that again. So my photos over the white background and my final shots here will have the Knight's eyes looking a little bit more symmetrical than they are here. But here are both of them all varnished, all finished. I'm so happy with how they turned out. I know the Knight still has these metal rods protruding from the bottom of their legs, but they will be cut down when I work out where I'm going to put the Knight on the stand, because they're going to be the anchor for the Knight so that the Knight can stand up on the stand. Whereas Hornet's going to be sitting, so she'll be fine. But yeah, who do you like the most? How do you think I did? Hope you've enjoyed today's video, making the Knight from Hollow Knight and Hornet from Hollow Knight Silksong. I had a lot of fun making these. I'm really happy with how they turned out. Who was your favourite? Was it Hornet or was it the Knight? I don't think I have a favourite out of these two, honestly. I love them pretty equally. I'm really happy with how the shading and the highlights came out on them. Hopefully you'll be here for the next video where I make their stand, which I've already made some components of. It's going to be quite large, so that will be coming up in the next few videos, but I should be able to get it all done in one video, I believe. Well, I hope to see you in the next video. Have a great day. Bye.